The galaxy had moved on. Earth, once the cradle of humanity's fire, had become little more than a footnote in galactic history. The last human ship to leave the planet, the Ark Protocol, had vanished into the vastness of space nearly 1,000 years ago. Some theorized that the human race had turned inward, retreating to hidden systems known only to their own kind. Others speculated that humanity had destroyed itself, consumed by the same reckless ambition that had sparked the human-Ulthari War. The Galactic Council, a sprawling alliance of over 3,000 species, had long grown accustomed to this silence. They'd written humanity off as a cautionary tale, a species too dangerous, too unpredictable to ever be trusted again. Earth's location was marked only with a simple warning: do not approach. Human technology remains unstable. But now, after centuries of uneasy peace, something had changed. On the neutral world of Res, the leaders of the Galactic Council gathered for the most important treaty in a generation, the Post-Human Stability Pact. Its purpose was simple: to ensure that no species, not even the rebellious Ulthari, would challenge the status quo ever again. Peace was imminent. War was a thing of the past. The first transmission came through without warning, an unexpected and garbled signal that pierced through the otherwise calm frequencies. It was a static-laden burst of Terran standard. The message was brief, cryptic, and unmistakable. We are not gone. At first, the Council dismissed it as an old relic of the human war era, one last fragment of history from a species that had vanished from the galaxy's stage. But a sudden, cold unease settled over the Council's chamber. That message wasn't just a random signal. It was intentional, purposeful. It was a warning. "No one even knows where Earth is anymore," said Councillor Kethar, the towering, spiny-headed Vayari representative, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's been centuries. Even our best scans can't detect anything coming from that system." "Maybe they never left," suggested Chalak, the Shredder envoy, her insectoid eyes narrowing. "Perhaps the humans never truly vanished, but simply hid. And now they've returned. To what end?" The room fell into silence. Across the galactic table, heads turned, and murmurs rippled like a wave through the representatives. Earth, humanity, was nothing but a ghost in the annals of history. To most species, the very idea of humanity's survival was laughable. But that signal was real, and the threat it carried was undeniable. In the silence, the Council's tech specialist, a Zenthari named Lantora, adjusted her holographic interface. Her fingers danced across the air as she sifted through archaic communications protocols, eyes scanning the ancient code for anything that might shed light on the mystery. Then she froze. "The signal is repeating," Lantora announced. "It's not just a random burst. It's a message sent by a human craft. Something large." A ripple of dread ran through the room. 1,000 eyes turned to the holographic map of the galaxy. An area once thought empty, lost to time, flickered on the display. The signal was coming from the outer edge of the galaxy, deep space, far beyond the boundaries of known, charted space. And yet, despite all the evidence, the message was clear. Humanity had returned. The emergency meeting was called immediately, convening all major factions of the Galactic Council on the neutral world of Res. The towering council chambers, designed to accommodate representatives of all species, from the massive Archants to the diminutive Lumari, now buzzed with heightened tension. For centuries, the Council had operated with an almost arrogant confidence, believing that no power in the galaxy could threaten the carefully crafted peace they had secured. But now, that confidence was eroding, replaced by uncertainty and unease. At the heart of the chamber, the Council's chair, Tharan Vex, a severe and calculating figure from the Fricor species, tapped his clawed fingers on the smooth surface of the central podium. His expression remained stoic, though his eyes darted nervously to the holographic display projected above them. The image showed Earth, its location once obscured, now flashing on the galactic map, surrounded by dark, unexplored voids. "We have no confirmation that this signal originates from Earth," Tharon began, his voice low but authoritative. "But the fact that it repeats, that it holds consistent patterns, suggests something deliberate, something intelligent. If the humans are truly back, we must consider the implications. A race that once nearly tore the galaxy apart. Is it possible that they've returned for retribution?" "The humans are extinct," argued Noli Khan, a representative of the Fioran species, his green, multifaceted eyes flashing. "We saw the evidence. The last of their fleets burned at the hands of the Ulthari. Their last strongholds were reduced to ash. The war is over." A few murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber, but there were other voices, rising with urgency. "We cannot ignore the message," said Laresi, a younger, ambitious delegate of the Zenthari. "It could be the warning of something worse. They might not be coming for revenge, but for something far more dangerous." The Harbingers. Chalak, the Shredder envoy, growled from his corner, his 6 arms folding in frustration. "We've heard the legends, the ancient enemies of humanity, the ones they supposedly wiped out centuries ago. What if they're returning? And if they are, wouldn't the humans be the only species capable of dealing with them?" At the mention of the Harbingers, the room went quiet. The term had been little more than a whispered fear, passed down in rumors and half-forgotten texts. Even the most advanced species of the Council had scant knowledge of them. But those who did, those who still remembered the old stories, understood the magnitude of the threat. The Harbingers were said to be a race of predatory beings, far older than any civilization known in the galaxy. Ruthless, unrelenting, a species that devoured entire star systems, wiping them from existence with an efficiency that terrified even the most battle-hardened. "Are we seriously considering that humanity could be our salvation?" Noli Khan sneered. "How can we trust them? The humans were dangerous, unpredictable. They fought wars across the galaxy like children, unafraid of anything but their own ambition. But it was Lantora, the Zenthari tech specialist, who silenced the room. Her voice, calm and methodical, cut through the noise. "I have cross-referenced their signal with historical archives. I've found something. A map. Coordinates, not of Earth, but of a location deep in the uncharted sector, beyond the outer rim. It is the site of a lost human research station. They were preparing something there. Something enormous." The silence in the chamber deepened, as if the entire galaxy were holding its breath. "We must take this seriously," Lantora continued, eyes scanning the holographic map with intensity. "Whatever humanity was preparing, they did not intend for it to remain hidden forever. They've come back, not to reclaim what was lost, but to finish what they started." Councillor Kethar, the Vayari representative, growled low under his breath. "We don't even know what they've become in their isolation. If they have the technology to hide for millennia, what else have they developed? We might not just be dealing with humans anymore. We could be facing something far more dangerous." A murmur of agreement spread through the chamber, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on every member present. The chair, Theron, rose from his seat, his voice cutting through the growing disquiet. "Then we must prepare, send a diplomatic envoy, but we approach with caution. The return of humanity changes everything." As the council debated, the image of Earth glowed faintly on the holographic map, the message echoing in every mind. "Humanity returns. Stand by for diplomatic reception." The waiting felt like an eternity. The Galactic Council had made its decision. A diplomatic envoy would be sent to the coordinates provided by the mysterious signal, but only after securing overwhelming consensus on precautionary measures. Armed ships would follow in the Leviathan's wake, a silent reminder that no one, not even humanity, was to be trusted blindly. In the meantime, the great human warship had been silently drifting toward the neutral world of Res, its massive bulk casting an ominous shadow over the fragile calm. At the edge of Res's atmosphere, the HSS Leviathan loomed, a behemoth of ancient design, forged during humanity's golden age of interstellar conflict. Its hull gleamed in the light of distant stars, but its sheer size made it impossible to mistake for a mere relic. At over 20 kilometers long, it dwarfed any known warship. The Leviathan wasn't simply large. It was a testament to humanity's sheer ambition and their terrifying ability to dominate space with reckless, calculated power. As it approached the planet, the hum of energy from its engines filled the communications network, sending out the same Terran transmission once again. Humanity returns. Stand by for diplomatic reception. In the council chambers, tension crackled in the air. No one spoke, but every species present could feel the palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. The holographic projections shifted, depicting the ship's final approach. Even the most hardened council members could not suppress the primal unease that had settled in their chests. The diplomats on the ground were the first to make contact. A shuttle was dispatched from rest to approach the Leviathan, a sleek vessel laden with the symbols of the Council's official neutrality. The shuttle moved toward the warship slowly, almost cautiously, as if every movement would trigger a response, one way or another. The shuttle's engines screamed as they fought against the gravitational pull of the Leviathan, which loomed larger and larger in their viewport. For a moment, it seemed as if the warship might simply devour them whole, but then the airlock opened with an eerie metallic hiss. The shuttle docked. A door slid open, and a woman stepped forward, human, unmistakably, and yet somehow out of time. Commander Ilara Quinn, clad in a uniform that hadn't been seen for centuries, walked through the airlock with an air of absolute command. Her eyes were calm but cold, filled with the weight of 1,000 years. Beneath her composed demeanor, however, there was an undercurrent of something more, something that sent a shockwave through those who stood in her presence. "Welcome," she said, her voice as crisp as the Terran accent still thick in her tone, though it had been dulled by age. "I am Commander Ilara Quinn, emissary of humanity. We have come to speak, not as conquerors, but as survivors." The council delegates had been briefed on the potential gravity of this moment, but nothing could prepare them for the calm certainty in her gaze. Despite the absence of weapons or threats, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that this woman could command the very stars themselves. A tense silence followed. The Vayari representative, Kether, was the first to speak. "Survivors." His voice trembled with incredulity, but his eyes never left her. "From what?" Ilara's gaze held steady. "From the past. And what is to come." Behind her, the shuttle doors slid shut, and with it, the full weight of the Leviathan settled on the council. Ilara's presence, like the ship itself, was an anchor that would not allow anyone to look away. "Have you ever heard of the Harbingers?" she asked quietly. The name struck the room like a thunderclap. Whispers filled the air as every species around the table exchanged uneasy glances. The Harbingers were a myth, a legend from ancient times, predecessors to the galaxy's oldest civilizations, said to be a race of creatures so old and powerful they had eradicated entire star systems. But here, now, was a human, a survivor, talking about them as if they were real. "I think it's time you listened," Ilara continued, her voice soft but filled with an unmistakable authority. "The galaxy is about to change, and humanity is here to make sure it survives." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, but there was no time to dwell on the meaning. Outside the window, the massive form of the Leviathan shifted again, casting its shadow over the entire chamber. Humanity had returned, and they were no longer the reckless, unpredictable species of ancient lore. Now they were something far more dangerous, and the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to be in their presence once again. The chamber fell into a heavy silence after Ilara Quinn's words. The weight of her gaze and the confidence with which she spoke left the council members uneasy. The Vayari representative, Kether, shifted uneasily in his seat, his spiny body glistening faintly under the harsh lights. His eyes flicked toward the holographic projection of the Leviathan outside, which hovered like a dark monolith in the sky. Harbingers? Kethar finally managed to ask, his voice laced with skepticism. You expect us to believe that these mythical creatures are real, and that you, humanity, have somehow prepared for their return. After all this time, after the wars and the collapse, you've been hiding, and now you expect the galaxy to trust you. Ilara didn't flinch. Her expression remained composed, cold as a glacier. She had faced much worse than skepticism in her centuries of survival. Her role now wasn't to convince the Council of Humanity's righteousness, but to ensure they understood the gravity of the situation. The Harbingers are no myth, Counselor, she replied, her voice unwavering. They are real, and humanity has been at war with them since the old empire fell. Your archives have forgotten them, but we haven't. She paused, her eyes scanning the room, meeting the eyes of each representative as though daring them to challenge her. And now, they're coming again. The peace you've carefully crafted, the fragile stability you cling to, it's about to be shattered. The words landed like a hammer striking an anvil, reverberating through the chamber. The representatives shuffled uncomfortably. No one had expected this. Humanity, long thought extinct or irrelevant, was now standing in front of the most powerful governing body in the galaxy, speaking of a threat none of them fully understood. Luresi, the Zenthari delegate, leaned forward, her antennae twitching. Why did humanity retreat? Why wait so long? If these harbingers are as dangerous as you say, why not come to our aid sooner? Ilara's expression darkened, and for a moment, the weight of centuries seemed to fall upon her shoulders. You have to understand, she began, her voice quieter, tinged with a sadness that was almost imperceptible. When the war with the Harbingers began, we thought we could defeat them. We thought we could stop them with our technology, our military might. But we were wrong. The Harbingers, they don't fight like anything we've encountered. They consume not just our ships and worlds, but our very essence. Over time, humanity retreated. We fought, yes, but we lost too much. We lost ourselves. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that humanity's isolation had not been a choice of cowardice, but of necessity, perhaps even survival. They had vanished from the galaxy not out of fear, but out of a desperate hope to rebuild, to prepare for a fight that would stretch the limits of their endurance. We waited, Ilara continued, her voice stronger now, because humanity had to evolve. We'd rebuilt, adapted, and learned. And in that time, we found something you've never seen. Something you cannot understand. We developed weapons, strategies, and alliances that have kept us hidden. Until now. The Zenthari delegate seemed intrigued, though she still kept her distance. And what of your fleet? This Leviathan. And the others. What have you been preparing for all these years? Ilara's eyes flickered with a faint trace of pride. We were preparing for this moment. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to survive. The Leviathan is a symbol, yes, but it is also a weapon, a tool of defense. But it is not the only one. Humanity's fleets are spread across the galaxy, ready to strike when the Harbingers arrive. A low murmur filled the chamber, the full scope of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a return of humanity. It was a statement. The once scattered remnants of a broken species had come together, not to reclaim lost glory, but to save the galaxy from an ancient predator. Tharan Vex, the Vrykor chair, spoke at last. His voice was calm, though it carried a hint of caution. And if we do not join you, if we do not prepare for these Harbingers, what happens then? Ilara's eyes hardened, her gaze sharp as a blade. Then you will face them alone, and you will not survive. A long, pregnant silence followed. The council members exchanged looks, some fearful, others skeptical, but none indifferent. The room felt smaller now, the stakes higher than any of them had anticipated. What do you expect from us, then? Kethar asked, his voice low but laced with begrudging curiosity. What is your purpose here, Commander? What does humanity want from the galaxy? Ilara's lips twitched ever so slightly, as if she'd been waiting for that question. "We want only one thing," she replied, her voice hard with conviction. "To ensure that we, and the galaxy, survive. We want an alliance, not of submission, but of necessity." The words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. The tension in the chamber was palpable, as if the very walls were vibrating under the weight of Ilara's words. For all the years of diplomacy and careful power balances, the Galactic Council had never faced a threat like this. Humanity, the once dominant species, had returned from the depths of space, not as a fractured relic, but as a formidable force, a voice that could no longer be ignored. And yet, despite their apparent strength, Ilara's presence was not a guarantee of unity. The question now was simple: could the Council trust humanity? Or would the past, filled with betrayal, war, and broken promises, prove to be too much of a barrier? The Vayari representative, Kether, was the first to speak, though his voice had softened. His previous challenge was tempered now with the hint of respect, or at least understanding. "An alliance, you say? After everything that has transpired, you expect us to simply join forces?" Ilara met his gaze without hesitation, her eyes unwavering. "You have no choice. The Harbingers are real, and without humanity's preparation and experience, you will not survive. This isn't about trust, it's about survival. We all know it." Councillor Noli Khan, the Fioran delegate, growled low in his throat, his sharp, angular face twisted with suspicion. "And what of your true intentions, human? You speak of survival, but what do you gain from this alliance? Do you intend to use the Harbingers as a tool to exert control over us all?" Ilara's lips tightened into a grim line, but her voice remained calm. "Our purpose is not control. We have no interest in the power games of the past. The war with the Harbingers has cost humanity everything. What we seek is peace, for the galaxy and for our own kind. We've learned the hard way that power is nothing if you don't have the will to protect those you care for." The words struck a chord with the Council, though it was clear that some were still wary. No one had forgotten the chaos humanity had once unleashed in the galaxy, nor the wars that had nearly shattered the fabric of galactic unity. The legacy of the old empire was still fresh in the minds of those who had lived through it. Yet beneath the skepticism, there was a growing recognition that they might not have any better choice. Luresi, the Zenthari representative, seemed particularly thoughtful, her antennae flicking as she absorbed Ilara's words. She leaned forward, speaking with a deliberate calmness. "Perhaps there is merit in what you say. Our people have known of the Harbingers only in whispers, as a shadow in our oldest texts, but none of us have ever faced them. If humanity has the resources to prepare, perhaps we do need your assistance. But an alliance with humanity is not something we can decide in one meeting." Ilara nodded. "I didn't expect a decision to be made today. But the galaxy cannot afford to wait much longer. We know where the Harbingers will strike first. We've had millennia to study their patterns. This is not just about defending our borders. This is about ensuring we are not wiped out before we have a chance to unite." The Zenthari delegate glanced at her fellow representatives, who nodded in agreement, signaling their recognition of the gravity of the situation. There was no denying that, for all their pride and strength, none of the Council species had the experience or capability to deal with an enemy like the Harbingers. Humanity's time in isolation, far from being a weakness, had given them a unique edge. An edge that might just save them all. Tharan Vex, the Vrykor chair, spoke once more, his voice deep and commanding. "Humanity's return has shattered our assumptions about the galaxy. We had hoped that the peace we fought for could last indefinitely. But now we must face the reality that peace is a fragile thing. Perhaps for the first time in centuries, the balance of power is shifting." He paused, and the Council fell into another quiet moment of reflection. The implications of Ilara's words were sinking in. Humanity's return had upset the delicate balance of galactic politics, and it seemed as though the only way forward was to forge a new path, one that required trust, cooperation, and most of all, unity. Ilara stood tall, her figure silhouetted against the holographic map of the galaxy. "I understand that this is not an easy decision," she said, her voice calm but filled with quiet resolve. "But the time for diplomacy and hesitation is over. The harbingers are coming. And if we do not act now, we may lose everything." For a moment, there was no answer. But then, one by one, the representatives of the Galactic Council stood. Their movements were slow, deliberate, reflecting the weight of the moment. Finally, it was Cathar who spoke again, his voice uncharacteristically solemn. "We will consider your offer, Commander Quinn. But know this, our cooperation will not come without conditions." Ilara nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "We never expected it to. But let us be clear. The Harbingers will not care about your conditions. They will care only about whether we stand together or fall divided." The decision was not yet made, but the seeds of an uneasy alliance had been planted. And in the growing darkness of space, the first signs of the coming storm could already be felt. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The Galactic Council, once content in its idyllic peace, was now thrust into a new and uncomfortable reality. An imminent, existential threat. The delicate balance of galactic politics had shifted irrevocably, and in its place stood an unspoken truth. There was no longer room for complacency. The galaxy's survival depended on the cooperation of species that had long stood apart, each with their own history, their own pride, and their own agendas. Humanity had presented their offer. Now, it was time for the Council to consider it. And just as Ilara Quinn had predicted, that decision would not come easily. The leaders of the various factions had gathered on Res, the once neutral world now transformed into a war room of sorts. The sprawling council halls were filled with strategists, engineers, and diplomats, each species bringing its own expertise to the table, each leader grappling with the enormity of the situation. At the center of the council hall stood a large holomap of the galaxy. Dozens of markers flashed across it, representing fleets, colonies, and military outposts. But there was one particular area that captured the attention of every delegate. A region of space long believed to be empty, marked only by the eerie glow of deep voids. The Harbinger's route. "We've established a likely trajectory for the Harbinger fleet," announced Lantora, the Zenthari tech specialist, her delicate fingers moving across the holographic interface. "They will approach from the outer rim, bypassing most of the galaxy's defense networks. Their vessels, if the historical data holds, are capable of decimating entire fleets with ease." A low hum of anxiety rippled through the room. The Harbinger's method of attack was not like anything the Council had encountered. They didn't wage war for resources or territory, or even conquest. They consumed. Entire systems vanished, their stars snuffed out like candles in the dark, leaving nothing behind but an uninhabitable wasteland. And humanity. Cathar, the Vayari representative, leaned forward, his sharp gaze fixated on the map. What role do they play in this? Will their ancient warships be enough to hold the line? Ilara Quinn, who had been quietly observing from the far side of the room, spoke up. Her voice cut through the murmur like a blade. "The Leviathan is a symbol, yes, but it is not our only asset. We've developed new technology, tech that was hidden away during the collapse, waiting for this moment. I've brought it to the table, but we need your cooperation to deploy it." New technology. Nolikon, the Fioran delegate, raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued despite himself. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Ilara stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back as she surveyed the assembled leaders. "Humanity's isolation hasn't been one of weakness. It has been a time of research and adaptation. We've found ways to modify our weapons, create new shields, and even enhance our fleet's mobility to an extent that none of you have seen before. But more than that," her voice lowered, filled with a quiet intensity, "we've created something capable of pushing back the Harbingers. It's a weapon that harnesses the very forces they use to destroy. A murmur ran through the council delegates. If Ilara was to be believed, humanity had not only prepared for the Harbinger's return, they had created a countermeasure, a tool that might tip the scales in their favor. That weapon is called the Fury Engine. Ilara continued, her gaze steady. It's a device that manipulates gravitational and temporal fields, capable of creating singularities small enough to incapacitate entire fleets, yet controlled enough to prevent widespread destruction. Singularities. Kethar's voice was laced with disbelief. You're telling us that humanity has perfected the creation of black holes. We have, Ilara answered simply, not on the scale of a star's collapse, but enough to obliterate the Harbinger vessels without harming civilians or infrastructure. The room fell silent. Every delegate, every representative of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, was left speechless. The idea of such power was unfathomable, yet humanity had already walked that dangerous line. They had created a weapon capable of bending the very fabric of space-time itself. Of course, Ilara continued, her tone now tinged with pragmatism. This technology isn't ready to be deployed without the necessary resources and cooperation. We need your fleets, your engineers, and your soldiers. The Fury engine cannot stand alone. It requires collaboration, not just from humanity, but from every species represented here. The room remained still, the gravity of her words sinking in. The idea of working alongside humanity, once unthinkable, now seemed to be the only viable path. The stakes were clear. The galaxy had two choices: fight together or perish alone. Lantora, the Zenthari, was the first to speak. Humanity's technology is impressive, but there is much work to be done. We will need time to integrate our fleets, develop new tactics, and plan for the Harbinger's arrival. Ilara nodded, understanding the hesitation. Time is something we don't have much of. The Harbingers are coming. The window for preparation is closing. The council was quiet once more, but this time there was no question about what needed to be done. The war had begun. The days following the creation of the War Council passed in a blur of frantic activity. The once gleaming cityscape of Res had transformed into a bustling war room, filled with the constant hum of machinery and the hurried footsteps of engineers, diplomats, and soldiers alike. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy now worked side by side, exchanging technology, knowledge, and strategies. The Harbinger's approach loomed ever closer, and the galaxy had no choice but to prepare for the fight of its life. Humanity had brought with it the Fury engine, the weapon capable of shaping black holes. It was both a marvel and a nightmare, an invention so powerful that its very existence demanded careful deliberation. Could it truly tip the balance in the war against the Harbingers, or would its power be too dangerous, even for the galaxy's collective forces? As the council began to coordinate, Ilara Quinn found herself torn between her loyalty to humanity and the need for cooperation. The political tensions between the various factions were high, and though they had agreed to work together, it was clear that many were still skeptical of humanity's motives. Even as the pieces of the Grand Alliance were slowly being put into place, trust was still a scarce commodity. At the heart of the preparations, the Leviathan hung in orbit above Res, a silent sentinel in the sky. Ilara had made sure that the ship was ready, though she knew it was more than just the warship that would define the outcome. Humanity's role was not just in its ships and weapons, it was in the knowledge they carried, the hard lessons learned from centuries of survival. They were not simply returning as a military power, but as the last bastion of a dying age. An age that understood war in ways the galaxy had forgotten. Inside the massive command center on Res, the council was in full session. A map of the galaxy was projected on the central table, with markers indicating the Harbinger's route. It was painfully clear. They were coming for the heart of the galaxy, to strike at its most vulnerable systems. The fleet formations were being readied, but time was quickly slipping away. "We don't have the luxury of waiting," Kether said, his voice sharp as he pointed to the glowing red markers on the map. We need to make a move now. The Harbingers will reach these systems in less than 4 weeks. If we don't act soon, we lose everything. Ilara stood with her arms crossed, observing the tense exchange between the council members. The Vayari representative's impatience was understandable, but the situation was more complicated than any of them fully grasped. The Fury engine was their greatest hope, but it wasn't without its risks. We can't afford to rush this, Ilara said, her voice cutting through the argument. If we don't integrate all the necessary systems and protocols, we risk creating more chaos than we're trying to prevent. The Fury engine must be deployed with precision. It's not just a weapon. It's a tool to control space itself. One miscalculation, and we could tear apart entire fleets, not to mention the surrounding sectors. There was a pause as the weight of her words sank in. Nolikon, the Fioran delegate, was the first to respond. Then let us do this the right way, he said, his voice measured, though his eyes held a trace of unease. But we cannot wait for perfection. The Harbingers will not give us that time. A deep silence settled over the table, and for a moment, every species present seemed to feel the cold reality of their situation. There was no more room for pride, no more time for hesitation. The galaxy's collective future depended on a fragile alliance between species that had never truly trusted one another. The lights of the command center flickered as the holomap updated with new data. The Harbingers were closer now, less than 3 weeks away from the galaxy's core. Ilara felt the familiar knot of dread in her chest, but she knew that fear would get them nowhere. The time for preparation had ended. The time for action had arrived. The first fleets began to move into position, and the construction of the Fury engine, a collaboration between humanity and the Council's finest scientists, was nearing completion. The weapon was a marvel of science, yet still held the potential for catastrophic failure. If it worked, it could be the galaxy's salvation. If it failed. But Ilara could not allow herself to think that way. There was no other option. The galaxy would fight, or it would fall. As the final plans were made and the fleets assembled, Ilara Quinn stood in front of the War Council. "This is our last stand," she said quietly, her gaze sweeping across the room. "And we will make it count. Together, or not at all." The room was filled with an unsettling quiet, as each representative met her gaze. They were still uncertain, still divided in their trust, but one thing was clear. They had no choice but to fight, and they would do so together. The galaxy's final hope rested in the hands of an alliance born out of necessity, not trust. As the fleets of the Galactic Council gathered in the designated staging areas, the sense of urgency was suffocating. Time was running out, and the Harbinger's approach was no longer a distant threat. It was a reality. In less than a week, they would be at the galactic core, and if the Council and humanity failed to stop them, nothing would remain. Ilara Quinn stood on the observation deck of the Leviathan, looking out at the vast expanse of space. The black hull of the warship loomed before her, a grim reminder of the sacrifices that had been made to build it. Humanity had not returned as conquerors, but as survivors, reluctant, cautious, and determined. She could feel the weight of the decisions they had made pressing on her shoulders. This would not be a war of conquest or glory. This would be a war of survival. The holomap of the galaxy flickered in front of her, showing the convergence of fleets, the combined forces of humanity, the Vayari, the Zenthari, the Fioran, and all the others. Their numbers were impressive, but the reality was clear. No one had faced the Harbingers before. None of them understood the full extent of the enemy's power. All they had were fragmented pieces of knowledge, passed down through ancient texts and war stories. The Harbingers were not just an enemy, they were an extinction-level force. At the command table, representatives from each faction were finalizing the strategy. Humanity's Fury engine had been integrated into a select fleet of warships, the most advanced among the Council's forces. It was their most powerful weapon, capable of harnessing singularities and controlling the fabric of space itself. Yet even with this advantage, there was no guarantee of success. "We've established our position," Ilara said, her voice steady as she addressed the leaders of the coalition. "We'll meet the Harbingers in the Beta Quadrant, close to the heart of the galaxy. If we can neutralize their advance there, we'll buy time for the core systems to evacuate and regroup. We cannot afford to lose the heart of the galaxy." Kethar, the Viari delegate, was the first to respond. "The Leviathan and the Fury engine are our best hope, but we can't rely on it alone. The Harbingers have an uncanny ability to disrupt our technology. If we go in blind, we risk losing everything." Ilara nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. "Our fleets will move in a staggered formation to create a defensive perimeter. The Leviathan will anchor the center, surrounded by the rest of the forces. If the Harbingers breach our defenses, we'll initiate the Fury engine to try and halt their advance." A sense of uneasy determination filled the room as the representatives nodded their approval. There was no perfect plan, only the knowledge that failure meant the end of everything. The fleets departed from Res, their immense forms streaking across the stars toward the Beta Quadrant. As they neared the designated battle zone, Ilara felt her heart pound in her chest. This would be the moment of truth. As the fleet formations fell into place, the first signs of the Harbinger's approach flickered on the long-range sensors. They were here. The first wave of Harbinger ships arrived in a formation unlike any Ilara had ever seen. Their ships were massive, black monoliths that seemed to ripple with a dark energy. They moved with a chilling precision, every ship in perfect harmony with the others. The sensors went wild as the enemy ships began to deploy their devastating weapons, gravitational pulses that disrupted everything in their path. "Now," Ilara barked into her communicator, her voice sharp with command. "Activate the Fury engine." A brilliant, blinding light erupted from the center of the Leviathan as the engine came to life. The gravitational fields around it twisted and warbled, creating miniature black holes that tore through space like thunderclaps. The Harbinger ships were caught in the blast radius, their hulls collapsing under the immense pressure. But the Harbingers weren't finished. They retaliated with a ferocity that defied belief. As their weapons clashed with the galaxy's best defenses, the ground shook with the violence of the battle. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as she watched one of the Allied ships disintegrate in a burst of brilliant energy, its crew lost in an instant. The Fury engine was powerful, yes, but it was not enough to turn the tide alone. "Ilara," Kethar's voice crackled through the comms. "We need reinforcements now." The situation was worsening, and the Harbingers seemed to adapt to their tactics faster than anyone could keep up. As Ilara gritted her teeth, she realized that the battle was far from over. But there was one thing she was certain of. They would not give up. Not now. Not when the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. "Hold the line," Ilara shouted, her voice hoarse but resolute. "We fight for our homes, for our future, and for every soul in this galaxy. We fight together." And with that, the fleets of the galaxy surged forward, the final battle unfolding in the depths of space.